Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the global launch of UNICEF's program guidance for the parenting of adolescents. We are so pleased to have you here with us today. My name is Marcy Levy, and I work with UNICEF headquarters in New York in the Adolescent Development and Participation section. During today's webinar, we will hear more about the role of parents in promoting healthy adolescent development and why this is so important, what the evidence base tells us about key considerations that should be included in parenting of adolescent programs. And most interestingly, we will hear from adolescents themselves and from a parent and facilitator of parenting programming about their perspectives on the parent-adolescent relationship and parenting programs. Before we begin, I wanted to just quickly offer gratitude and appreciation to the many internal and external collaborators who contributed to the development of this programming guidance, including lead author, Professor Sarah Skeen, content from consultations with parents and adolescents from around the world, and our technical advisory group of external experts whose names you can see listed in the acknowledgement section of the guide. So thank you again for joining us. I'd like to now share a few words from UNICEF's Executive Director, Henrietta Fore.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining UNICEF and our partners to help us launch UNICEF's programming guidance for parenting of adolescents. Adolescence is a period of dramatic change and development. How parents care for their adolescent children can have a deep and lasting impact. But as parents support their adolescents, parents themselves need support too. They need skills and strategies to help their children on the sometimes rocky journey to adulthood. This need has been heightened by COVID-19. Adolescents are faced with lockdowns, social isolation, school closures, and mental health challenges. Dropout rates are on the rise, and young people are facing diminished opportunities as economies struggle to recover. Parents themselves are facing economic hardships, including job losses, as well as disrupted access to social supports, and increased stress and mental health challenges. And that is why these new parenting guidelines are so important. While parenting guidelines for young children are well established, we saw a growing need to help parents as they support their adolescents through this challenging time, but also beyond. The guidelines and interventions are based on a growing body of evidence that give parents new and adapted tools as their children navigate their second decade of life. From better communication skills to mental health support, to positive parenting activities that can help end gender stereotypes that affect adolescent girls. And guidelines also make a clear case for increased investments for parents and adolescents alike. After all, these young people are tomorrow's adults, tomorrow's doers and dreamers and leaders. We must support them in the right ways. Thank you all for being part of this new effort. And thank you in particular to the adolescents and parents who are here today to share their perspectives. Have a great webinar.
Thank you so much, Edie, for these inspiring and supportive words on the importance of parenting programs for adolescents. I think we have a great community of champions and advocates. I'd like to now introduce two of today's speakers. First is Professor Lucy Kluver from the University of Oxford and University of Cape Town. Lucy will share perspectives on how parenting is so important during the adolescent years. We'll then hear from Professor Sarah Skeen from Stellenbosch University, who will provide an overview for us of the guidance and its core content. So over to you, Lucy.
Thank you so much. And it's such a delight to be here at the launch of what is really an exciting and innovative piece of work. And I think particular credit to Marcy, Sarah, Jumana, and the team for putting this together and thinking it through in all its complexity, but turning it into something that is simple and comprehensible. If we move on, when we think about parenting, there's often an automatic assumption that when we most need parenting is when our children are in infancy. And there's huge truth to the importance of that. We know that it's a crucial area, the first 3 years of biological and neurobiological development. And it's also a time when parents often feel very unsure of what they need to do. But what's increasingly being understood is the essential importance also of this next key stage of early to middle childhood, a time when behavior problems start becoming an issue, when school and school readiness are absolutely crucial, and when your child starts to interact very much more with the outside world. But in the last 10 years, we've had a massive advance in our understanding of the centrality and importance of the time of adolescence as a time of crucial parenting support. I think we all know, we're very familiar with the heightened risks of adolescence now, both online and offline. But also we understand much better this time of huge neurodevelopmental change and capacity. And also this very changing relationship between parents and their children during adolescence, the growth of independence, and often a real time of conflict. I think it's safe to say that understanding how to engage with a small child does not equip you to dealing with that child when they're 17 and yelling at you as they slam the door on their way out. If you move to the next slide, I'd like us to take a moment as we think about this time of change in adolescence, to close your eyes, take your fingers off the keyboard, don't check your emails for a moment, and think about yourself as an adolescent, as a teenager. What were the things that mattered to you? What were things that worried you? And how important was your family and the people who cared for you in how you saw yourself and your future? And if you open your eyes again, I think it's sometimes only when we do remember our own experiences that we bring ourselves back to that turbulent and exciting time of adolescence, and often understand the crucial nature of that parent-child relationship, which Sarah will talk about in much more scientific detail later. If you move to the next slide. I think we've also seen, as ED4 said, that COVID has been a massive global challenge for parenting. And this is a really exciting brand new paper published by colleagues, including UNICEF colleagues, looking at contacts to child helplines across 60 or more countries. And what we see very simply here is a substantial increase during COVID. And that's even accounting for the fact that many children were unable to reach helplines. If you go to the next slide, we also need to think, and it's particularly important, about parenting as being well beyond the title of parenting. Parenting suggests biological parents, but we now know from a huge amount of demographic evidence that almost half of children live in extended families with grandparents. In regions like Asia Pacific, that's more than 50%. And we also see many contexts and countries in which grandparents are the primary caregivers for their children. Now, this is particularly urgent when we get to our current COVID epidemic. And if you move to the next slide, you'll see some early findings from an important paper which is about to be published in the Lancet. And the details will be coming out soon, but essentially I think the key message from it is that we are seeing not only a huge impact of COVID on mortality amongst adults and older adults, including grandparents, But we're seeing this linking with a huge number of children, up to 2 million, who are losing a parent or a primary caregiver. And what this means especially is that those families experiencing all the stresses that ED4 talked about are experiencing this added additional stress of bereavement, and that those families are going to need extra support, both economic and in terms of their parenting. If we go to the next slide, I think we move from that into some really good news. This is a global evidence gap map led by Frances Gardner, Sophie Backus, and Jamie Lachman, who are doing this for the World Health Organization's exciting new WHO parenting guidelines. And what they found is 77 systematic reviews showing the effectiveness of parenting programs, with over 100 randomized trials now in low and middle income countries. If you move to the next slide, we also see from evidence in multiple countries that parenting programs function as SDG accelerators. They reach not only one single sustainable development goal, but multiple goals and targets. And we see here from an IRC study in Thailand and a Parenting for Lifelong Health study in South Africa, reaching not only reductions in child abuse, but also mental health support, reductions in economic hardship, improvements in reducing substance use, improvements in family relationship quality. And so we're starting to see that with one program, we can reach multiple things. And studies from Jamaica recently have shown that these impacts can be lasting over long periods of time. If you move to the next slide, we're also seeing, and this is such new evidence, I saw it for the first time in analysis this week, but this is some work led by colleagues at Catholic Relief Services and USAID, who are delivering in-person parenting programs at massive scale in Zimbabwe. This is to 40,000 families. And we see here early evidence from both caregiver and adolescent report showing reductions in physical abuse as a result of parenting programs delivered at scale in a context like Zimbabwe. If it can work, it really can work. If we move to the next slide, we're also at a time of an unprecedented global opportunity. And next week on the 28th, there's going to be the launch of the interagency vision for global support for parents. And that's led by UNICEF, WHO, the Global Partnership to End Violence, ECDAN, and PLH. And I think, and as other groups and agencies join that, what we're seeing is a recognition of the essential nature of supporting parents, but also a recognition from families that this is something which everyone needs and everyone can benefit from. If we move to the last slide, I think what the evidence is showing is very clear. It's that if we don't invest in adolescents, we're going to be making a huge mistake for the future. And that if we're going to invest in adolescents, we have to invest in parenting. Thank you, and over to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Lucy. This was really fascinating. I think you made my job a bit easier by foregrounding those issues. I want to pick up on one, I think, critical point you mentioned, which I think is very relevant for my presentation as well, which is that when we speak about parents, that we're talking about biological parents, we're talking about other primary caregivers, and even the family as a whole. So anyone who's involved in the care and the raising of adolescents. I'm Sarah Skeen, and my job today is to take you through the guidance and what it contains. Next slide, please. It's made up of three main parts. The first section is a section on the evidence of the importance of parenting and on parenting programs in promoting healthy adolescent development. And I think contains quite a lot of information which could be quite useful for advocacy purposes as well. The second is an overview of the key considerations and core content for parenting of adolescents programs. And I'm going to speak about that in a bit more detail shortly. And then the third part is really an annex with a lot of detailed information, which we hope can support practical efforts to actually develop, to adapt, and to expand programs. So we've really designed that section with programmers in mind, and really to reflect, to allow them space to reflect on the issues that need to be considered. And then throughout the guidance, there's a number of different case studies, mainly from low middle income countries, which provide nice opportunities for learning. Next slide, please. So why is this focus on parents of adolescents so important? And I think Lucy's really shown, gone into that in quite a lot of detail. There's just a few extra things I want to draw everyone's attention to. First of all, in global health, when we talk about adolescents, we always talk about this idea that they're undergoing these rapid, intense physical, social, sexual, psychological changes. But we don't always talk a lot about their need for the ongoing love and support as they actually face up to this and as they transition into adulthood. As a result of these changes, adolescents are seeking independence and autonomy. They're spending more time out of the home. They're spending more time with their peers. So parents, if they want to remain engaged, really need to find new strategies that they can use, which meet their adolescent children's needs. So the parenting role shifts a lot during adolescence, but I think it's important to say that, we often hear about the influence of peers, but parents also retain influence over the development and well-being of their adolescent children, and they remain very important during that period. Next slide, please. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that positive parent-adolescent relationships can have profound influence on adolescent development, and that is sustained into adulthood and even across generations. I think also, even when adolescents are living in contexts in which they experience a lot of adversity, the relationship with their parents can protect them to an extent from the full negative impact of what they're being exposed to. But that said, I think it's really important for us to highlight, and we've tried to include this in the guidance as much as possible, that the parent-adolescent relationship is greatly influenced by a range of personal factors, of course, but also social and political factors. And often as a result of these factors, parents are experiencing high levels of stress themselves, and they also require support. Next slide, please. So the guidance focuses very much on parenting programs of adolescents, but it does so within the kind of acknowledgement of the broader context in which many adolescents and parents live globally, and acknowledgement of those social and political factors. So parenting programs of adolescents are programs that promote knowledge, attitudes, skills, behaviors, and practices that parents can use with adolescents. And they're not very different in many ways from programs for parents of younger children. They share a lot of features with them. They build on the same types of skills and content, but of course, in a way that's developmentally appropriate to meet adolescents' needs. And also they include specific focus on issues that emerge more prominently in adolescence. So a good example is the promotion of healthy sexual and reproductive health behaviors. Next slide, please. I'm not going to read every cell of this table. This is taken from a table that's in the guidance document, which kind of maps out the different roles that a caregiver will have across early and late childhood and early and late adolescence. And I really just want to make the point that there are common threads, of course, in the roles of parents and what they and how they engage with their children, which remain, which are consistently important throughout childhood and adolescence, although the ways in which parents actually implement their role, let's say, changes. And I'm going to focus a little bit more, if you move on to the next slide, just on one example, which is the provision of a safe physical environment. So when we have a very young child, let's say under the age, we've got their prenatal to 4 years, but a very young child, the way that you provide a safe physical environment for that child is very much about removing hazards in the household, making sure that they can't fall over and hurt themselves on sharp objects, no open flames, no boiling water, no open, access to open water outside and that kind of thing. Already when children get a little bit older and shift into late childhood, they are spending more time outside the home, and there are different harms outside of the home that they might be exposed to. And parents at that point, they're still very much in control of the whereabouts of their children and what they're doing and their friendships, even in contexts where children might spend a lot of time outside playing by themselves or with their friends. Ultimately, it's the parent who says, when it's time to come home and start getting ready for, dinner and bedtime, etc. But of course, we see a change over time, and we get into early adolescence, the control basically starts to diminish, and parents should remain actively engaged and be aware of where their children are and who they're spending time with. But they might not be able to control every aspect of their activities until finally in late adolescence. we see that there's this continued active awareness, but actually not much control necessarily, particularly towards the end of adolescence, of what they're doing. So it just really shows how one thread can, has different manifestations across the early childhood to late adolescence life, part of the life course. Next slide, please. So this is the second part of the guide. It's organized into what we call key considerations for programming and then core content of programming. So the key considerations are basically, you could say, principles of programming. And I think, looking at some of those terms, as you can see, they're gender responsive, inclusive, evidence-based. They might seem quite generic to look if you were to read the titles like that. But what we've tried very hard to do is make sure that each of those key considerations focuses very, very closely on these types of programs specifically and what these things actually mean in the context of parenting programs for adolescents. So I'll just give a brief overview of those before we move on to the content. Next slide, please. So the first is the strengths-based approach. So basically, programs should be designed to build on parents' existing strengths, on their skills, on the experience that they already have, and the knowledge that they've already gained in their parenting lives, and really should be designed to maximize existing individual and community assets. So this is in contrast to a deficit-based model, which might focus on negative parenting practices, particularly as perceived by another or for people coming from outside. So it's not about focusing on negative aspects of parent situations or about minimizing their skills or about attributing blame for contextual factors that are beyond their control. The next key consideration is how to make programming gender equitable. So as we know, adolescence is a time when stereotypes can become entrenched, but parenting programs really provide a great opportunity to address this head on. First of all, through the actual content and activities that form part of the programming, but also through the way that interventions are delivered and which caregivers they seek to engage, and ensuring that they are open to and accessible for male caregivers, for example. Next slide, please. Adolescent participation. Parenting programs can help parents to create conditions for their adolescents to participate in decisions about matters that affect their lives, so around education, relationships, employment, finances, etc., and teach strategies on how to do that. Next. Programs should be inclusive, they should be non-commercialized, they should be accessible. And of course, parenting program of adolescents, I'm using that term, it covers a very wide range of different types of programs that can be targeted at different groups, can be designed and delivered in different ways with different outcomes. And it's important that programmers are engaging with different groups at all stages, including the intended beneficiaries, designing responses that reflect the different needs of those groups, and capacitating the workforce to make sure that they're sensitive to these different needs in the kind of planning and implementation of programs. And then finally, evidence-based programming. As Lucy highlighted, there is a very well-developed evidence base, including from low and middle income countries. And really, there's actually just no excuse anymore not to employ evidence-based programming at this stage of where we are. Thanks. The next section that I'm going to take you through is the core content areas. And really, this is an overview of content that evidence-based programs often include. But of course, not all content areas need to be covered in all programs. They would really be selected according to the program aims and what the target group of the program, or who the target group is. So the first, I think, relates quite closely to the concept of nurturing care, warmth, love, and affection. So there's research that shows across diverse cultural contexts that warm adolescent parent relationships are associated with positive outcomes for adolescents. And programs can actually help parents to show warmth, so teach them strategies to show affection, praise their adolescents, show interest in them, and set aside time to spend with them. Adolescent development as well, programs often focus on this. They provide information about the psychological, social, and physical changes that adolescents undergo to help parents to explain these changes to their children, and also to help them to be able to calibrate their own responses to them in the situation, like Lucy said, with the adolescent slamming the door, to understand that this is a normal part of development. Programs can also help parents to have, new skills or strategies to discuss sensitive emerging issues like sexuality or substance use with their children. Respectful communication. So in this process of becoming more independent and more autonomous, adolescents often express opposition and defiance. And programs can support parents with strategies for modeling nonviolent, respectful communication styles for adolescents, and also help parents to provide opportunities for their adolescents' views to be heard and considered. As adolescents age, obviously nonviolent discipline techniques also need to shift to be developmentally appropriate. For younger adolescents, this might be that programs can provide strategies for parents to define clear rules for behavior and proportionate discipline techniques. But for older adolescents, of course, things change. So programs can help parents with strategies to navigate the shift to where they will now be able to, need to communicate what the expectations are about behavior and what the proportionate, again, consequences would be of not meeting those expectations. I chatted a little bit about safe environments already, and I just want to sort of add an extra point that programs can also, in addition to teaching strategies about how to promote a safe environment for adolescents, they can also provide information about the types of risks that adolescents face, because a lot of parents don't actually know exactly what the most, kind of recent or current issues are, and what it's like to experience those as an adolescent today. They can also help parents by giving them information about how, when you need to seek additional support and how to actually do it as well. Programs often provide support for parents to provide for their adolescents' basic needs as well. And many programs have been very successful with combining parenting content with socioeconomic strengthening components, or with content on household economic issues, such as family budgeting as well. Thanks. And then finally, parental mental health. So, of course, there are many parents that experience poor mental health, but who are able to continue to effectively parent their children. But in other cases, mental health conditions can make it difficult for parents to fully provide the care that their children require. And mental health conditions and parental stress have been linked across a range of contexts with poorer outcomes for adolescents. Parenting programs also provide an opportunity to improve parental mental health through teaching skills on self-care practices, but also through developing support networks and linking parents to additional mental health support as required. And the final part of the guide is about designing programs. You can go to the next slide, thanks. And this is this section has got detailed information about how to develop programming responses. It covers a range of scenarios, whether they will be standalone programs or integrated into existing services. There are sections on scale up and monitoring and evaluation, again, very specifically about the issues for these types of programs that need to be considered. And then the final part is an annex, which has 9 steps to design parenting programs of adolescents. And the idea is that these provide very practical steps to guide programmers in designing, delivering, and evaluating parenting programs. Next slide, please. And you'll see here are the 9 steps, and really depending on where the programmers are in the process, they may not need to complete all 9 steps. They may not need to necessarily do them in this order, but each of these 9 steps has a practical tool attached with a range of different information that will help to guide programmers through the programming cycle. And this is just one example. This is from step 4, which is about the parenting curriculum. So in many cases, of course, there may be existing programs that are already operating in context. And this is just a tool, or part of the tool. It actually goes on a bit further than this, about how programmers can look and see if there is an existing program and decide whether this program is good enough, if it is worth scaling this program up or not. And these are the kind of questions that programmers would need to ask themselves to, in this, following this slide, assess a theoretical base, to assess the evidence base for this program, and assess the content of the program. So this goes on and on. So there's a whole range of resources to guide those types of decisions. Thanks. So I think that covers the guidance in a nutshell. In conclusion, I'd really like to leave you with 2 thoughts. First of all, it's very clear from the evidence that prioritizing the needs of parents of adolescents including in low resource contexts, has got great potential to improve adolescent development and well-being. And then second of all, if you leave with anything today, any thought in your heads, I hope it's that we need to think of parenting of adolescents within the life course approach. Parenting doesn't stop at 5 or 10 or even 40. It's a lifelong, ongoing, ever-changing process. And parenting programs of adolescents should be seen in this light. They should build on early investments. They should provide what parents and adolescents need right now. And they should set up equitable, respectful relationships that can be enjoyed all the way into adulthood. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy and Sarah, for such informative presentations. And Sarah, I think you did my job very well for me to make those 2 last points. So instead of speaking more, I'd like to transition to my colleague at UNICEF, Fabio Frischia, as well as our important guests, Akona, Justin, and Anna. Can I ask all 4 of you to please turn on your cameras? And over to you, Fabio.
Thank you very much, Marcy, and thank you to the speakers. This I think was a fantastic framing that leads to our conversation about parenting in more concrete and immediate life experience. My name is Fabio Frischia. I work with ADAP based in the New York HQ office. We're gonna spend the next minutes with the 3 friends, three people who have direct experience about parenting programming. We have Akona from South Africa, Justin from the Philippines, and Anna from Ukraine. Akona is a community facilitator. She works with the adolescents in school and community-based parenting programs in Khayelitsha, South Africa, through the Institute of Life Course Health Research. She also, very importantly, is a mother of a 16-year-old boy. Justin is the director of Youth Voices Count, which is a beautiful name to begin with, which is a regional network for young people in the Asia-Pacific region. He's passionate about local and national human rights advocacy in the Philippines and beyond. He advocates for health human rights for sexual and gender minorities, especially LGBTIQ persons. Anna comes from Ukraine. She's 16 years old. She's the president of the school council. She's a member of 2 youth organizations. She is the editor of a local youth newspaper, and she's also enrolled in an online course on video blogging. Anna, she's definitely catching up. Despite being the youngest of everybody, she's also extremely active and already has a significant experience. So the panel, we'll first have Akona, and then we're going to ask questions to Justin and Anna. So Akona, first questions are for you. In your role as a community facilitator, you work with adolescents in school and community-based programs in South Africa. Can you tell us what are some of the main issues that adolescents share with you and about their relationship with their parents?
Okay, Fabio, thank you. The first thing they share with me is that they feel that they cannot have conversations with their parents about things that are bothering them personally as adolescents. Things like peer pressure, which include partying, things like drugs, things like alcohol, and things like gangsterism in schools, which is something that is big here in Khayelitsha. For example, they get in sexual relationships while they are not ready for it, and because their parents are too busy to talk about them with that. They end up talking to friends, they end up talking to people who are outside, and sometimes they do not get the right advices from them. Also, another thing they talk about is that they feel that parents are too busy with work. For example, here in my community in Khayelitsha, a general parent would go to work in the early hours just before even the children are awake to go to prepare for school. and then they come back in the late hours just before dinner. So they don't know what actually the children are, what they are getting to during the day. So it affects their relationship because now they don't have that time to talk to the parents. Another thing they talk about is that they feel that parents judge them a lot. If they do something wrong or they find themselves in a compromising position, the parent will not sit with them down. I'll make an example. For example, there's this violence in school where boys fight a lot. So if an adolescent finds themselves in that situation, the parent will quickly judge and say that the child is unruly, the child is misbehaving, and not sit with the child down and talk about how they found themselves in that situation. The last thing I would say is that they feel parents do not check in with their emotions. They agree that parents make sure that they have roofs over their heads, they have clothes to wear, they have food, but the parents are not checking in on how their day was like. Is there something bothering them? How are they feeling in general? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akona. Now tell us about your personal experience. You are the mother of a 16-year-old boy, so it cannot be more adolescent than that. What do you enjoy the most about parenting an adolescent?
Yeah, parenting an adolescent is an adventure at its own. But what I enjoy the most is teaching him. It's all the lessons, the life lessons that I am teaching him. Teaching him to be a good person, teaching him to do good to him and to others, teaching him to practice positivity in his life. So that's one of the things that I enjoy. Another thing that I enjoy with him is bringing him in and making sure all the decisions that we do at home, I do with him. Like, for example, I would make monthly budgets with him. So that's one thing I enjoy the most, so that he can have the responsibility and then understand that if there are things that he wants and then the budget at home does not allow, he can understand that those things he will get, but not this time and maybe some other time. The last thing I would say is that adolescents are fun. They are fun. They have their own music that they like. They have their dances. They have even their language. So that part I enjoy the most, because I normally do that with my child, and we'd imitate people, imitate things that we see on TV, do the dancing. So that's what I enjoy the most.
Thank you very much. I agree on the music. It helps you get connected with what happens in the world when you're overworked. Your adolescent is a window. Now, you obviously have a lot of experience. What advice would you share that can be useful to other parents as they care for their growing adolescent children?
I would say the other parents must communicate. It's important that we communicate with our adolescent. I know it's hard, but we can start with small things, like things that we are watching on TV. Communicate about that, so that it makes it easier for us to communicate when there are bigger issues. And also it makes the child to know that they can come back and communicate with you with anything that they want to in the future. Another thing I'd say, that listen to them. I believe that as human beings, we all want to be heard and we all want to be listened to. So knowing that there is someone that is listening to you, someone that is hearing what you are saying, even if they're not going to do anything about that, but knowing that someone is listening to you. Another thing is that they must not judge them. They should find all the mistakes and all the challenges and take them to teachable moments. The last thing I would say is that we must be careful of them, of reacting negatively on things. even if it's something that you are watching or that's something that is around you, but be careful of reacting negatively, because it might happen that your child goes through a similar situation. Now the child will be afraid to come to you because they know how you reacted when something like that happened. So that's what I can say.
Thank you very much, Akona, for your first-hand experience. I think that you've been actually talking about concept that we just heard from the previous presentation. You've been speaking a lot about positive, warmth, communication, discussing rather than judging. Thank you so much, Akona.
Thank you.
We're going to move to our younger speakers, Justin and Anna. Justin, I will start first with you and then move to Anna and then back to you, Justin and Anna again. Thank you for being with us. We have heard from a number of people at this point about the importance of parent-adolescent relationship. We also have heard about what research says that it is important to incorporate when designing a program. Now we would like to hear from you. So Justin, from your experience, what do you think adolescents want and need from their parents as they grow?
Thanks so much, Fabio, and good evening from the Philippines. I believe that adolescents, I'm not an adolescent anymore. I'm 24, so I've left the adolescent age group, but I'm still a youth, a young person. But nonetheless, adolescents or youth need affirming and safe, supportive, welcoming, and accepting households and families. This is the only way for them to fully develop and to be able to express themselves. They are still at a stage where the love and support that they get from parents is one of the most fundamental and the most important things that they could receive, especially from a family member. And studies would say that safe, affirming, supportive, inclusive homes provide the best avenue for adolescents and youth to be able to be themselves and to be able to fully express their identities and not to repress these identities, because that does have detrimental effects, not just on their mental health, but on their well-being, their physical health, their help-seeking behavior, among other things. And finally, I believe it's super important to accept children and adolescents for who they are, as this helps them in other aspects of their life. And I think it's about time for us to build these safe spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justin. Anna, I'm going to ask you the same question. From your experience, what do you think adolescents want and need from their parents as they grow up?
So, hi everyone, thanks for the question. And well, actually, it is not difficult to notice that children in this age group indeed seek for attention and support. For instance, there are kinds of things that cannot be solved by adolescents easily, and those are educational issues. As an example, choosing an educational institution or their future vocation is not effortless for children, and there are more and more such points where we need help or advice to cover them independently. As a matter of the fact, adolescents frequently desire acceptance and acknowledgement of their hobbies and passions. Even if it is not something common, we want our efforts and excitement to be admitted by others. Not every child is a student council president or a member of a youth organization, so as not every child is interested in unusual kinds of dancing, writing, painting, sports, and so on. Those factors are so different, yet they build up the personality of an individual. Adolescents want and need their parents to show interest in their ideas and activities. Moreover, psychological support means a lot when adolescents do not know what to do next in their lives. That is a common issue because sometimes they just feel something is going in the wrong direction and have no idea how to fix that on their own. It is awfully sad when such obstacles lead young people to different kinds of depression or detachment. Adolescents really need the emotional support from their parents, including making sure they are able to communicate well together, help with making decisions, and even getting their support if the adolescents need to seek professional help. So to sum everything up, adolescents seem to look independent because they want others to believe they are, but actually it is often quite the opposite. That is the reason why they need support and guidance, even if they do not show that. They want and need love, warmth, attention, and acceptance. They still need care and they need respect. This really means a lot to young people, whether they are like 10 or 16 years old. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much. Anna, I would like to quote you for your last one of your last statements. They seem to be independent, but it is the opposite. And I think that finding the right balance in between this tension, I think is a critical element. Thank you both for your answer. I think that you gave us some new element that we haven't touched much so far. The importance of acceptance. Each person is a word on its own, and in many cases, adolescents actually are quite different from their parents, and it might be difficult for parents to accept that. But in fact, one key of effective parenting is to accept them and also support them, because some decisions that they might do actually might expose them to hardship from societies if their behaviors might be against normally accepted social norms. Another important thing is supporting them in decision about life plans. Adolescence comes with the dreams, which are beautiful, but also experience of parents is critical in suggesting them different options and right path towards their adulthood. And I think that you both confirmed an important thing that we've been already listening quite a bit now: the interest in their hobbies, in their specificities, the importance of a positive communication, the importance of warmth, acceptance. These are very critical and central points. One last question for both of you. I'm going to move back to Justin now. Justin, if you were in charge of designing a program for parents to support their adolescent children, what advice do you think that parents need?
Thanks again. Just to say that in 2020, my organization, Youth Voices Count, a regional organization in Asia Pacific, we launched a survey alongside UNICEF entitled Coping with COVID. The survey aims to understand the well-being of adolescents and youth of diverse identities at that time during the pandemic, to note. And part of the survey evinced that majority of our respondents still live with their parents amidst the pandemic, which means that they are dependent on other members of the household in providing for their daily sustenance. The burden of family care, it seems, is shared in the home, but may also be an important predictor for their acceptance and support within the family. If the household is unsafe or unaccepting to the identities of adolescents, this poses a huge risk on the children's well-being. This often forces them to remain unwilling to disclose issues pertaining to their identity, health, well-being, among other things. Therefore, the information I believe parents need is ways to understand the ever-evolving society that they live in right now. As you pointed out, Fabio, our parents lived probably in a different time, and now in a time where adolescents right now are living in a different type of society. I believe as things have evolved. This can include understanding gender, sexuality, sexual health, among other things around us that are part and parcel of their child's life. So I think this is one thing that parents need to know and understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justin. Anna, same question to you. If you were in charge of designing a program for parents to support their adolescent children, what advice do you think parents need?
Personally, I reckon that the best and the most truthful information that parents can get for enhancing the relationship with their children and adolescents is the insights got through real-life communication with them. An amazing solution is to pay a lot of attention to children and be really patient if they do not open up their heart and soul in front of parents. That is the question of the time, and nothing can really change that. So my piece of advice would be not just asking, for example, how was your day, but trying to be closer and more precise by saying what made you happy today or what made you worried. That actually shows how much parents are deeply interested in their children's lives, because the answer to the first neutral question is highly likely to be something like everything's okay or everything's fine, and more specific questions make us think a lot about the experience we got that day and basically how we can present it to others, especially to our parents. For another tip, I will come back to the mentioned issue of interests and hobbies. Parents could try to be involved in what their children are passionate about. Not fully, I mean, but they should have the slight idea of that. We really have a lot of advantages here. So firstly, parents and adolescents have something to talk about, have something to do together, and probably even are able to share experience or ideas. Just setting aside the time to spend with adolescents and listen to them and to learn from them is so important. As a conclusion, I'd like to say that no one can guess what is going on in the head of another person, yet we can try to find the right approach to them by getting closer to them in different areas of their lives. Listening questions and asking, being present, these are arguably the only ways to build up a healthy relationship between any two people, which is extremely needed nowadays.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much to both of you. Justin, you said something very critical, I think. Society evolves, meaning that when parents were adolescents themselves, time has changed so much. And this is one of the trickiest things to do as a parent. Like, your experience is not relevant anymore because the world has completely changed. But as you remind us, it is very important that parents do realize this and try to, to shift their perspective and being more open to things that were inconceivable when they were themselves adolescents. And Anna, thank you so much for these very concrete tips about how to create the space to have a meaningful conversation with the adolescent children. I think that you have been giving us a lot. One only thing I would like to recall from the content of the guide that we've been hearing from the presentations, the importance of the other side. Parental mental health. It is not an easy job to be good parents, and parents, as Akona said, they work, they have intense life, and they have sometimes very short time to dedicate to their children, and they are themselves often going through difficult times. So parental support, mental health is an important complement, as the guide reminds us. Thank you very much, Akona, Justin, and Anna, for your direct witnessing. Thank you so much. I think it was a great integration to the more theoretical part that we heard in the first part of this webinar. Marcy, back to you.
Fantastic. Again, thank you so much to Fabio, Akona, Anna, and Justin. I'm inspired by you, and I'm also excited to be part of this sort of global network of people across all ages who are committed to the parenting of adolescents and to supporting both the parent and the adolescent. We have time for, there's been questions and attempted answers in the chat, but I'm going to ask Sarah to respond to one of the questions, which is from Mary, and says, other than gender socialization of adolescents, does the guidance factor the differential or tailored strategies needed to address mothers or fathers, given the varying agency of both, to make decisions about their child's lives? Are we talking about parents as a homogeneous unit rather than having a gender differentiated strategy? And Sarah, would you be able to come in with a few thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So I think, first of all, just to say that there's a thread about gender, in terms of the parents' gender, but the adolescents' gender, the whole way through the guidance. So there's many different parts in the guidance where we reflect on issues around gender and how those impact on what's recommended. If you look, there isn't specific guidance around how to do specific things for specific types of programs. As I said earlier, parenting programs with adolescents cover a very wide range of programs. Lots of different outcomes. There's a table of outcomes, potential outcomes near the beginning of the guidance. And they can be targeted in different ways and have different intended beneficiaries. If you look at the practical tools section in step 7, there's some information in there about the targeting of parents of different genders, how to make, what to think about if you want to really be able to create demand amongst a specific group of parents, male caregivers, for example, and a small summary of some evidence on that specifically. But really what the practical steps are intended to do is to get the programmer to think through all these things and to guide them through the decisions they need to make. With one of those being the fact that there are different roles for different parents of different genders and how to engage them and what you might need to do within the programming, planning, and also with the implementation to make sure that you're engaging both parents of different genders. So I wouldn't say that it's a homogenous, we're considering parents as a homogenous unit at all. The step 7 really takes you through some of those choices and the kinds of things that need to be thought about without providing, extensive information on that issue specifically. But I think it provides a good kind of starting point to outline issues that programmers need to think about. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. And Tanvi, if you could show the final slide, this is a good segue into some additional resources we wanted to share with all of you from both UNICEF, but also from multi-partner initiatives at UNICEF with UNICEF and partners. The links, you can't click on the links in the slide, but the links are being posted right now in the chat and includes resources to Sarah's response, Mary's question on gender responsive parenting, which may be useful. So we'll close now with, again, enormous thanks to everyone in front of and behind the scenes to help bring together this amazing group of advocates for parenting of adolescents. We are thrilled to see you all today and look forward to more conversations and work together for these populations. Thank you and have the good rest of your day.